romantic out here in the moonlight, huh?
Yeah, Gwendolyn, it's romantic, all right. But I always get nervous in canoes.
Oh, there's nothing to be nervous about. These things are safe as a trundle bed. Why, you could dance a rumba and it wouldn't tip over.
The way they feel to me, a one step would tip them over.
Don't be like that, Aloysius. Look, why don't you come over here and kiss me, huh? You ain't laid that paddle down once.
I'm afraid to move, Gwendolyn. Every time I scratch a mosquito bite, the boat rocks.
I never seen such a lily. You brought your water wings, didn't you?
Yeah, but they ain't blown up. I don't dare to breathe.
Aloysius, look, I'm going to show you that your fears is groundless. I'll walk right up the middle of the boat and kiss you.
Oh, Gwendolyn, I wouldn't do that.
Like
Sit
that.
down, I tell you. The water's coming over the side. See, here we go.
Oh, my gracious. Well, I got just one thing to say, Aloysius McCarthy. Your love ain't deep enough. The water only comes to your waist.
Well, they say the course of true love never did run smooth, and I suppose that's just as true on water as it is on dry land. Which reminds me that our chronicle for today concerns a boat, a flying boat. So sit comfortably back and listen to the saga of Guba, Ship of Discovery. The skipper, of course, during the next few minutes will be our science reporter Al Zink, who is casting a weather eye at the sky in the hope that the voyage ahead won't be too stormy. That's the picture as we embark on another excursion in science.
Thank you, Bob Stone, and how do you do, everyone? The narrative we're about to unfold was related to me by Mr. Geoffrey M. Tate, member of the Archibold expeditions of the American Museum of Natural History. I found the story very thrilling, and I'm sure you will, too.
Why did they christen the ship Guba, Al? I thought the Guba was a peanut.
I imagine you're thinking of a goober, Bob. This ship's name is Guba, G-U-B-A.
Oh, yes.
It comes from a Papuan word meaning sudden storm or whirlwind. You see, one of Mr. Archibold's earlier planes was sunk by a Guba while anchored in Port Moresby Harbor.
That's sort of tossing a glove in the faces of the fates, isn't it, Al?
Yes, Bob, I suppose it is, but that's the spirit of adventure. Anyway, according to Mr. Tate, Guba was a craft with a definite personality, and the prodigious things she performed in the field of aeronautics not only filled many newspaper headlines from 1938 to 1940, but endeared her to Mr. Archbold and all the men who flew in her. Not once did she fail them, in spite of the demands made on her, and her record in scientific exploration is still unequaled.
Sounds like a very noteworthy craft. Would you care to describe her?
I intend to, Bob. Guba was a Catalina type PBY-2 flying boat, a Navy bomber, and had a wing spread of 104 feet. She was powered by two 1,100 horsepower Wasp motors, had a cruising range of about 4,000 miles, and carried a crew of 5. Mr. Archbold took her over from Consolidated Aircraft Corporation in December 1937, and her reason for being acquired was to take part in the Archbold 1938 New Guinea expedition, which was led by Mr. Archbold and carried out in conjunction with the American Museum of Natural History in New York.
Those Archbold expeditions are justly famous. I suppose they have everything worked out with science.
You bet they have, Bob. Expeditions of this nature cannot be run on a hit-or-miss basis. For instance, it was expected that in some of the localities the expedition would visit, dropping of supplies would be the only way in which the ground parties could be provisioned. Therefore, Guba experimented with parachutes. Her interior equipment had to be practically rebuilt to allow room for the personnel. Bomb racks and gun mountings were torn out, a cargo handling monorail, a mechanical load calculator, special radio gear, and other devices were installed. The ship was often referred to by the press as the Flying Laboratory, and sometimes irreverently as the Flying Grocery.
What was the course of a flight, Al?
She was to fly from San Diego, California to Hollandia, Dutch New Guinea, so her performance had to be perfect. There were many preparatory transcontinental flights. On June 2nd, 1938, she left San Diego on the first leg of her journey, reaching Honolulu after 18 hours and 8 minutes flying time. The second leg, Honolulu to Wake Island, took 14 hours and 43 minutes, and the third, Wake Island to Hollandia, was covered in 16 hours and 8 minutes.
The Guba didn't waste much time, apparently. Were there additional lengthy preparations in Hollandia?
There certainly were, Bob. On her arrival, Guba was hauled up onto the 300-foot ramp which had been prepared for her. Engines were overhauled, new equipment and new parts were installed, and finally the ship was ready. In the meantime, American, Australian, Canadian, and Dutch scientists had assembled. A Dutch military party of 56 men had arrived. Natives had been recruited in Borneo to serve as porters, and buildings and warehouses had been erected to accommodate personnel and supplies.
That sounds like the invasion of Normandy. I'm anxious to hear about the start of this expedition now. Where'd they strike out for?
Reconnaissance flights were first conducted. On one of these flights, the observers saw through a break in the clouds what appeared to be cultivated land, plowed apparently, and irrigated by ditches and trenches full of water. This was in the heart of unexplored country, and as no human population was known to be there, it was decided a thorough investigation should be made.
Reminds me of Sir Conan Doyle's Lost World. What happened?
To explore this strange tract of land, which was given the name of Grand Valley, inland camps were to be set up on the shores of Lake Habama, about 35 miles west of the unknown valley, and on the banks of the Edinburgh River, one of the main streams north and east of the area. Patrols were to proceed overland and meet at a prearranged point in the valley where the scientific party would join them.
Where did our old friend Guba fit into the plans?
Guba was to fly the men to the camps. First, however, came the question of whether she could land, as the depth of water was unknown. And secondly, if she could land, would she be able to take off again at that altitude? The Edinburgh camp, at an elevation of only a couple of 100 feet, did not offer any problem. But the altitude of Lake Habama was over 11,000 feet, and no takeoff from water had ever been made at such a height.
How did Guba meet her initial test?
To find the depth of water, a flight was made to Habama, and when Guba was over the lake, scores of ropes, 5 feet in length, with a weight at one end and a float at the other, were dropped from the flying boat. Every float disappeared, dragged down by its weight, proving there was a depth of more than 5 feet. So, Guba landed.
What about the more important test? Was she able to rise again?
Yes, Bob. Guba seemed to know what was expected of her. Her propellers roared and screeched, beating at the thin air. She rose from the water, circled about the lake, and settled gently down again.
Good for Guba. And then?
And then tons of supplies were flown to the 2 camps, and finally the 2 patrols set out. Along the tortuous way, provisions were dropped to them by parachute from Guba. At last, the military parties entered the valley and joined forces there. By skillful piloting, Richard Archibold found it possible for Guba to land on the narrow Belim River, which flows through the valley, and the scientific party moved in and began to explore.
And what did they find?
They found a population of perhaps 60,000 persons, Bob, never before seen by white men. Several members of the party were initiated into the tribe by a blood-sprinkling rite. The blood was that of pigs. Guba was thought by the natives to be a giant bird, and the tribesmen would fondly stroke her sides, but ran like rabbits when her propellers roared.
That place didn't happen to be the mysterious Shangri-La or Hidden Valley so publicized in 1945 when an Army plane crashed, killing 21 of its 24 passengers, I suppose.
The very same, Bob. The friendly reception accorded the survivors of that crash by the Pasigum tribesmen, I believe, was largely due to the work done in 1938 in the valley by the Archbold expedition.
Very interesting, Al, but I believe this is primarily the story of Guba. Did she play any part in the recent war?
She certainly did, Bob. When the expedition's work was completed, Guba's engines were changed, and she flew to Sydney, Australia for an instrument check. While there, she was chartered by the Australian government to cross the Indian Ocean, which had never been flown, and make a survey of the islands therein. This was Guba's first military flight. As a result, Guba added 2 more laurels to her record. She was the first flying boat to cross the Australian continent and the first aerial craft of any kind to span the Indian Ocean. On she flew across the African continent, again a first for a flying boat, and reached Dakar in Senegal. She paused at Dakar just long enough to fill up her tanks and then commenced the Atlantic crossing, reaching New York on July 1st, 1939. A special certificate of award was struck by the National Aeronautic Association to commemorate Guba's great cruise and the first encirclement of the globe at its greatest diameter.
A most remarkable achievement, Al. Did that flight end Guba's peregrinations?
Her destiny was nearly written, Bob, but she refused to rest. The Royal Air Force took her over in September 1940, and she was used for a time as a cargo carrier. Later, she was assigned to Coastal Command, where part of her job was the spotting and bombing of U-boats and protecting the slow-moving convoys. After that, she was transferred to Transport Command and used to carry passengers between England and Gibraltar. At a later date, she was put on a run between the Rock and West Africa, and part of her career is recorded in the Royal Air Force official booklet, Atlantic Bridge. Not even the Luftwaffe could stop her.
Truly a gallant old girl. What finally happened to her, Al?
Her epitaph is written in a recent letter received by members of the Archibold expeditions from Transport Command, Royal Air Force. A sentence from it reads, "She is no longer seaworthy, and it is proposed to have her towed to sea and sunk."
A blessing on her memory, Al. Thank you for telling us the story of Guba, and our sincere appreciation to Mr. Tate for the details he supplied. And ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to have a copy of a paper by Jeffrey M. Tate, member of the Archibold Expeditions of the American Museum of Natural History, a paper which will furnish you with the story just heard plus additional interesting facts, all you have to do is address a penny postcard to Excursions in Science in care of the station to which you are now listening, asking for scientific paper number 245, entitled Guba, Ship of Discovery. That's scientific paper number 245, Guba, Ship of Discovery. Your copy will be put in the mail free of charge. Now let's turn to that feature in our program, which is known by our regular listeners as Question and Answer Time. This period, you know, is devoted to the answering of scientific questions which have been sent in by you listeners. The answers reflect the most up-to-date and accurate information available, since they are based on facts provided by staff members of the General Electric Research Laboratory or other equally trustworthy institutions. Al, after that story of Guba, you should be able to give flight to your imagination and give our questioners a run for their money. Our first letter offers this challenge. Is it possible for unseen lightning to cause the following effect? While ice fishing during a heavy snowstorm, our listener heard a sharp sound, and at the same time his hair seemed to be alive with shocks of electricity.
Well, Bob, I'd say that effect is due to static electricity produced by snow falling in dry air. Friction of snow particles and the high potential gradient which accompanies such storms creates considerable separation of charge. It often leads to St. Elmo's fire, a brush discharge such as is seen on high-tension wires. Increased charge would lead to a thunderstorm.
Quite a hair-raising explanation, Al. Next comes one of our frequent atomic energy questions. Is it true the atomic bomb will generate a temperature of 100 million degrees Fahrenheit?
It is perfectly true, Bob, unbelievable though it may sound. It is the first time such a high temperature has been generated on this Earth. An atomic bomb may produce a temperature hotter than the interior of the stars.
Next question. When things are heated, they expand, and when they become cold, they contract. If this is true, why does water expand on freezing?
It is not a law of nature that things expand on heating and contract on cooling. In fact, there are other substances in addition to water, such as bismuth, silica, and germanium, which expand on freezing. Most things have the same structure at low and high temperatures. High temperature causes the atoms to be in more motion, and so the substance expands. Cooling takes away the violent motion and bombardment of one atom against another. The attractive forces between these atoms become stronger, and the substance contracts. In the case of water, change from a crystalline form or ice to liquid causes a change in the kind of structure. When water is crystalline, there is a very open structure with a lot of unoccupied space between the atoms. The atoms in the liquid form, on the other hand, are closely packed.
You may want to refer the next inquiry to Buck Rogers, Al, but here goes. Can a person in a rocket ship see the sun or stars when there are no dust particles in space to reflect the light, thus making it totally dark? Along this line, can meteors be seen?
I won't bother Buck on that one, Bob. From a rocket ship in space, the stars would be visible even better than they are from the Earth, since our atmosphere absorbs some of their light. It is true that the sky would be dark because of the absence of dust particles to scatter the sun's rays, but the sun and other stars would shine brilliantly. In the case of a meteor going by, it would be difficult to see because a meteor does not become visible to us until it encounters friction in our atmosphere.
It seems to me you could count the meteors by the holes in the side of your ship, perhaps, Al. And speaking of friction, let's have none between the control room and ourselves. For I see by the studio clock that it's time for us to leave. So it's up to me to say thank you, Al Zink, and goodbye, everyone, until our next excursion in science.